What is up, y'all? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. Tonight, Randy and I are going to be talking about the top 5 shallow water areas and offshore areas to focus on during the fall to winter transition. We'll be covering highland reservoirs, lowland reservoirs, river systems, and grass lakes. So we're going to be covering a lot of different types of water. So hopefully you guys will know where to fish during this November and December time of the year. Randy, how's it going?
Doing good, Johnny, man. Just looking forward to tonight's deal. This is it's unbelievable how these seasons creep up on us. I mean, it seems like yesterday we were just talking about catching bass during the dog days of summer, and now we're getting into winter, and it's like, man, where does time go? It's just like it's like I said, we're basically starting the winter patterns right now.
For sure. It's crazy because it feels like we skipped over fall almost because it was so warm and then it got cold right away and now we're in winter. It's like there was no fall, which is kind of a bummer, but we should be able to get some good winter fishing. I love winter fishing personally. Fortunately, here in Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas, Southern Missouri, we can fish year round through the winter. It can get cold, but that's some of the best fishing of the year.
Yeah. Man, that's the thing about it. It seems like I fish more in the wintertime than I do any other time because I do the on the water jerkbait lessons, but I do not like being cold. But it's like I'm in the cold all the time, and it's not bad if you're not moving around and running in the boat. But man, it's just I'd much rather just have shorts and a t-shirt on.
For sure. Well, guys, before we jump into talking about all the areas that we're going to break down on both Google Earth and Navionics, got to give a few shout-outs to our sponsors. First up, Bridgeford Foods. They are the first and long-time sponsor now of the Fish the Moment live stream. Every week we give a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky away. Thanks to Bridgeford. And, man, Randy, I'm so addicted to this stuff. I've been eating Bridgeford beef jerky now on every single fishing trip. It stores well in the boat. It's, not super high in calories, has good protein. I'm doing CrossFit workouts now a lot, and I need my protein. So it's a great source of protein. And it just is so easy to slide into a glove compartment and stuff like that. So I love my Bridgeford beef jerky. I know a lot of guys on the stream have either received a 12-pack case of beef jerky and say they love it, or they've checked it out at Walmart or a local gas station, stuff like that. But I know you're sponsored too by Bridgeford, Randy. It's just some good stuff.
Yeah, it's like eating candy or a bag of potato chips, man. When you open it up, you got to finish the whole thing. So it was sort of, and I got a quick story to tell you about that. I was doing a promotion at a Walmart store, actually down close to where you live, Johnny, down by Bentonville, about 5 years ago. And it was a big open house promo for a Walmart down there, and they had the Jack Links had this big monster truck there, and they had the Jack Links people there, and we were there, the Bridgeford deal. So I went up to this Jack Links guy and I said, "Hey, I tell you what, why don't we do a taste test comparison? We'll have a blind taste test comparison to see, who likes Jack Links or Bridgeford better." He would not take me up on it. So I thought that said a lot right there. So not to diss Jack Links, but it was just sort of funny on that.
That's a good deal. Eric over here saying watch your sodium. Definitely, I try to watch it too much. I actually track all my food intake now from all my micronutrients and all that stuff. When you're doing CrossFit workouts, you're working so hard in your body. I try to track everything now, and so it's good. But I always try to find ways to fit in some Bridgeford beef jerky. And this past week, we did a live stream with John Suka from the Bass Tank, who is our other sponsor, and we did a giveaway based on comments about what you guys thought about LiveScope and your perspectives on the conversation between Randy and John. If you guys want to hear a great conversation about LiveScope and how it's affecting fishing, check out last week's live stream. But the winner of the giveaway this past week was JP Fishing. I thought he put a great comment that's covered something we didn't really talk about too much during the stream. And he basically says that LiveScope has helped him understand fish behavior and positioning. Not only does it help you pinpoint the areas that you need to fish, but it also helps you understand the bass movement and bass behavior underwater. And I really think that that's a great part of LiveScope personally for me. I feel like I learned so much more about how bass move, how they react to baits, all these different things, which help my overall fishing, not just when I'm using the LiveScope. And as long as you're using LiveScope, I feel like to understand and learn more about fishing, I think it can be a great tool. If you become reliant on it and that's all you use, that's when it starts to become an issue. But I definitely can see how you can use it as a great learning tool to understand bass better. So JP, great comment, JP Fishing. Send us an email at info@fishmoment.com and we'll have Bridgeford send you a free case of 12 packs of Bridgeford beef jerky. Good deal there. Okay, and then the other thing is we want to give a shout out to the Bass Tank, the air sponsor for the live stream. The owner of the Bass Tank was on last week, John, to do that debate with Randy. It was really great stuff. Again, check that out. If you guys have any sonar installation needs or need someone to help you pick out which fish finders to put on your boat, just give the Bass Tank a call here at their number. You can also go over to thebasstank.com and send them a message, contact them here, and they can set you up with any fish finder you need and also get it installed the right way. So huge shout out to Bass Tank for being a continued sponsor of the live stream as well. Good deal. Well, Randy, let's jump right into it and start talking about our favorite areas to fish in this fall to winter transition. And before we actually show our areas on the screen, I guess I want you to start out by giving us an overview of your thoughts about this transition, high level about like how the fish are changing, their behavior, what you need to be thinking about kind of at a macro level during this time of year.
Yeah. The thing about when you're talking about seasonal movements and transitions, I find that everybody wants to have like patterns and seasonal behavior, movements of bass. They want them to fit into this nice little neat box where they can say, this is what they do under these conditions. Then, they spawn, then they go into the post spawn, then they go into their summer patterns. And it's not that defined, and it's not that easily described. Most of the time that I found about when you're talking about seasonal transitions, it's a very abstract thing that happens very subtly and very slowly, although there are some weather events that will really accelerate that process. But for the most part, let me give you just a good example of, say, the jerkbait transition, like we're starting into right now. They're going to bite jerkbaits all year long, but when we're talking about what most people perceive as jerkbait fishing, they consider it a colder water technique, sort of a wintertime technique. So say, for example, you go out the 1st of October and you start throwing a jerkbait on points. And, you go for a couple trips and you don't catch any. And then all of a sudden, maybe a cold front runs through and, the air temperature gets a little bit cooler than what it has been. And on your next trip, you're throwing a jerkbait on points again, and you catch one fish on a jerkbait on points. And then you go out maybe a couple weeks later and there's been another cold front come through. Let's say the water temperature's dropped another, 4 or 5 degrees, and you catch 3 fish on a jerkbait that day. That is how the progression of most patterns change from season to season. It's something that's very subtle, and it's something that's sort of triggered by different weather events. And most of the time it's triggered by some type of change in water clarity or water level. Water level and water clarity combined with the two are the two biggest factors that I've seen in transitions, because a lot of times in the fall time of the year, lakes are getting pulled down a little bit. They've been at summer pool, which is normally high. They start to get pulled down to winter pool gradually, some quicker than others. That combination of dropping water and dropping water level and dropping water temperatures will get those bass moving. So when you're talking about like what we're talking about now, this late fall to winter transition, it is just all over the place. I mean, you've got different parts of the lake that transition before others based upon the geographical angles of the bank. Some areas, like if you're fishing more stained water up in the river arms that are flatter, you're going to have a different personality of fish than you are in the clean water on the lower end of the lake. Every lake is a dynamic living entity within itself that changes, with those conditions too. So the gist of it, what I'm trying to say here, guys, is that don't try to like be able to define this real narrow perception of what transitions are, whether it be fall to winter, winter to spring, spring to summer, because it's just it is what it is. I mean, it's not as easily put into words as what a lot of people would like to.
For sure, and the fall transition into the winter is also a really weird time of the year because every year it's different. It's not like the summer transition where you go from like that post-spawn to summer where all the fish get on the ledges and you find fish in offshore brush and stuff like that. The fall to winter transition is very weird because sometimes, depending on the weather, the fish can be in 30 foot of water, or they can be a foot of water on the exact same lake year to year. And one thing I want to go through real quick, Randy, just as a kind of an overview of how crazy the fall transition can be, is to show you one of the lakes that I used to fish a lot in central Arkansas, which is Lake Hamilton. Lake Hamilton drives me crazy. If you've ever seen any of my old videos, guys, you know that I have a love-hate relationship, mainly just a hate relationship with Lake Hamilton. It is absolutely maddening because this lake is so weird and inconsistent during this late fall winter transition. I fish it a lot in November and December when I was home for winter break with family. There's a lot of tournaments out in Lake Hamilton. And it's a pretty small lake in general. There are so clear water down by the lower end where you have 3 to 4, maybe 5 foot of visibility. And then it comes up the river, it gets a little bit more stained. Up into this area, you might have 1 foot to 2 foot of visibility, especially up in these river arms. And then way up the lake, you actually have water coming in from Lake Ouachita, which is really cold and really clear up here. So you have a really weird mixture on this lake of different types of water clarities, water levels. And I just want to give you an idea of how I've heard and know that tournaments have been won on Lake Hamilton in December. This is during that fall to winter transition. Down in central Arkansas, the winter transition really starts heavy in January. So kind of all through December, you get weird patterns. But I also want to run you through like 5 or 6 tournament winning patterns on this lake that have happened in consecutive years. So basically from 2009 to 2015, all of these different patterns played year after year after year, the same month at the same time. So I remember back in 2009, one of the tournaments got won by a guy fishing main lake points. And that year we got a ton of rain. And what the guy was doing was fishing some of these main lake obvious points out here, and the current was pulling out of these creeks, and fish were setting up on brush piles and rock piles, and he was throwing a football jig. He was throwing football jigs on all these main lake points that were some of them more obvious than others, but basically just dragging a jig offshore. Seems like a pretty obvious pattern. Good deal right there. Well, the next year, I heard about that. I went out, and I never caught a single fish on a jig on the main river at all. I tried it for like 3 days, never could get it to work. And I'm like, what is going on? And this is when I was like 16. I was like, I know how to catch fish on a football jig. What's happening? Well, I found out from a buddy that instead of the fish being out here on the main lake on this point, and that's where the quality fish were, the next year, 2009, 2010, everyone was catching them in these super shallow boat docks way back in the creek back in here. Water temperature wasn't any different. Water temperature was actually 55 degrees out here the year before when he was catching them. It was like 54, 53 degrees back in here the next year. So it was actually colder, but they were catching them way back on these boat docks, skipping jigs underneath these boat docks, really, really shallow. That next year was the year of the Alabama rig. And really what happened that next year is that there was a lot of wind and stuff on the main lake, and the tournament got won on, the main lake with main lake points, guys throwing Alabama rigs. That's kind of an outlier year. Some guys were catching them on bridge pilings. But the fish were still out on the main lake that next year, and guys did not catch them very well back in the creeks at all. Weather was a little bit different, conditions were different, water level was different. There's a few things that changed, but nothing that major that I feel like should cause those fish to be more on the main lake than way back in the creeks. The next year, just roll into the next one, I know the guys caught him back in this area of the lake on shallow flats in like 3 foot of water. And there's some shallow vegetation that got in the lake. And guys were catching them up here in 1 foot or 2 of water, just going down these banks, throwing the lipless crankbait. Super duper shallow. Not on the main lake at all, just kind of back in these pockets and coves. And that's where all the guys who were catching them in the tournaments were catching them. It's just really shallow and lipless crankbait. Where the year before, everyone was on the main river with the Alabama rig in the main lake. And those fish were still being caught on the Alabama rig in the main lake, but just not the quality fish, just smaller fish. Then the next year, same exact area of the lake, but instead of catching them on these shallow banks with grass, they were catching them on these kind of runoff points off these islands, throwing jerk baits and also Alabama rigs again on these like little random offshore subtle points off these islands. So over the course of 5 years, there's 5 different patterns that played. Some on the main lake, some back up in the creeks, and it just, year after year, was so different. And it always drives me wild because I would try to fish the main lake one year, and it always seemed like when I was fishing the main lake, I should be fishing the shoreline or fishing back in the creeks. And then when I would try to go fish back in the creeks, then the fish were biting better on the main lake. And the moral of this whole story, just kind of getting a roundabout on it, is that the fish can be everywhere in that fall transition. They can be far back in the creeks as you can go, like the dead backs of the creeks, or they can be chewing on main lake points. And sometimes one's better than the other, and you have to keep a very open mind this time of year. It's so very different. The water temperature, water level, all those things have an effect, but it's very, very interesting how that all works. And before I get your response there, just a real quick thanks to Sharky Ohio for the super chat, $5. Says, thanks, Johnny. Keep up the great work. Appreciate that super chat. So, Randy, what are your thoughts on that about the craziness of Lake Hamilton?
Yeah, Hamilton. I fished a couple tournaments there. Fished the Forest Wood Cup there, and to me, Hamilton, it's all about boat docks. I mean, it's like the lake is just wall to wall docks, and I think there's a population of bass that live on those docks 12 months out of the year, whether it be around the brush around the docks, suspended, in the deeper parts of them. But Hamilton's a cool lake, man. It is. It's just like it's not an easy lake, but I really enjoyed fishing down there.
Yeah, it always threw me off because, like, obviously there's a lot of boat docks, and I've caught fish doing everything on Hamilton that time of year in December. I think I've caught them every single way you could possibly think, from flipping in 2 foot of water to dragging a jig in 30 foot of water in brush piles. And that's just so typical for this time of year. And so when we go through all these patterns or areas, keep in mind that we're giving you ideas of areas that have worked for us in the past, but you're probably going to have to try multiple of these areas throughout a fishing day to actually find success. You're not just going to be able to go pick one of the areas we talk about and just go fish. You're going to have to experiment and move around to really find what's working best. So, yeah. Randy, how about you start out with your first type of area that you would fish in this time of year? What's your typical type of area you would fish? Maybe pull up Navionics, give us a look.
I've got, let me share my screen here.
By the way, Michael said that's what happens to the podcast. That is just my bad. I've been so caught up with a bunch of other projects. You guys are going to see, actually next week I'm going to unveil a project that's very big. And I'm also unveiling two big projects over the next couple weeks. So I've been very busy with a bunch of other stuff. That is 100% on me that I've not got those podcasts out. So I'll try to fit that into the schedule. But once you see what I'm launching here in the next couple weeks, you'll understand why maybe the podcast got put on delay a little bit. Anyways, there you go, Randy.
Okay. First of all, I'll start this little part out saying, here's some general information, guys, about seasonal patterns. One thing that you're going to find, and it's been my experience in bass fishing, is the clearer the water, or the clearer the overall water clarity on an impoundment, the clearer it is, the more options you have, particularly this time of year, late fall, early winter. If you've got a lake, as the water clarity decreases in a body of water, it gives you less options. So the first one I'm going to pull up here is Table Rock Lake. Now, Table Rock Lake, a lot of people consider it a clear water impoundment, but if you guys have seen many of my YouTube videos, the lake is losing a lot of its clarity. The lake it's basically half as clear as it was 35, 40 years ago. So it's becoming more of an average clarity type lake. But what you have on a lake like Table Rock, where it's considered a clear water lake, you're going to have a tremendous amount of options here. You're going to have bass this time of year that are still in 3 foot of water, and you're going to have some bass that are living 50, 60 feet deep on the bottom and suspended, and everywhere else in between. So when you're dealing with a lake, whether it be like Lake Lanier in Georgia, Cumberland, Douglas Lake, just any of those type of clear water lakes, you got a lot of different stuff going on this time of year. Here's the first thing I look for. We've got 5 deals we're going to talk about, but this is one of the first transitions that I'm aware of in most any lake across the country that has any type of varying rock composition. If you have a lake that has, anything between pea gravel to chunk rock banks, and you've got a variation in the slope of the bank, you're going to have this particular pattern working. Now, right here, I pulled up the back of just an average sized creek on Table Rock Lake. And this is like indicative of a lot of creeks across the country. The back end of the little feeder coves in the creek are going to be flattening out, as you see here. It's going to be just, fairly shallow in the middle and flat. And as you come further out the creek, you're going to start to have a little bit steeper banks. So the transition that I see is like, for example, in October, first part of November, before those really bad cold fronts come through, you're still going to have water temperatures that are knocking on 60 degrees. And as long as that water temperature is in the upper 50s to around 60 degrees, there's going to be a lot of fish using these flat areas like this. No, you can tell by the coloration here. These are flat banks, usually gravel, some type of mixed rock bank, but it's going to be fairly shallow here. And when the water temperature is still in the 50s or 60s, I may be back in these flat areas like here, throwing a top water, maybe throwing a shallow crankbait, fishing any type of visible cover. But the first transition that happens usually is after you have that first major front come through this time of year that really knocks that water temperature back. Now, you guys know what I'm talking about. You'll have one of those Arctic, it doesn't even have to be an Arctic front, but it's one of those fronts that come in that, temperatures get down to freezing. The temperatures are like 15 degrees below normal on what a normal low is. And it really shocks that surface water temperature. It drops it down, 3 to 5 degrees over the course of that frontal passage coming in. Now, when that first front comes in like that, that's really a bad front, you'll notice a big transition of those fish that were on the flat banks here. They start to move to the nearest steeper banks, like right here. And you can tell in this particular contour, you go from a flat bank to a fairly steep. In this case, it's going to be like not a short bluff that you call it, steep rock bank, but you can see, the contour lines, how tight they are, how sharp the drop is there. Now, in here, they would be up here in the 60-degree range, October, early November. Right now, mid-November, after that first front, these same fish are going to start gradually pulling out of the back of this creek, and they're going to start setting up on these steeper banks right here. This is the first major transition that I see almost anywhere that I fish across the country, is that transition from flat banks to a little bit steeper banks in the major creek arms. Now, this is just one population of bass that we're talking about. I could go down and I could go to the lower end of the lake and I could explain to you that transition that occurs in deep water. But this particular thing is what I consider probably some of the most catchable bass in the lake. When you have bass that are in that zone of less than 10 feet, this time of year, those bass are really, really weather dependent. Their aggressiveness and their mood will really change based upon the sunlight intensity, the direction and the speed of the wind, the time of the day, all these factors going together. But most of the time, when you start having these bass move out of those shallow flats to those steeper banks like there, those bass are highly catchable. And we're right in that time frame right now. Oops, stop. You hear me there, Johnny?
Oh, sorry, I have my mic muted.
Okay.
Yeah, that's some good stuff there, Randy. And you mentioned kind of explaining the behavior on those deeper water fish. Now I'm actually going to pull up Table Rock and give the guys an idea of the deep water fish as well. And that's my first type of area I'm going to focus on. And really, you can apply this to any kind of clear water lake that has 3+ foot of visibility. And this, actually, what I'm talking about here applies to lakes even with blueback herring in them, or with gizzard shad, any type of kind of shad forage in them. So Randy talked about going back in those creeks, getting onto the steeper banks, or then staying on some of those flatter banks. One thing that happens in those situations is that you're going to have a good percentage of those fish being largemouth back in those creeks. There'll be some spotted bass on like a Table Rock, but you're going to have some bigger largemouth as well back in there. One thing you'll find if you move, and I'm going to pull up Table Rock here, is as you move out of the creeks, out of here, back out towards the main lake, especially on lakes with spotted bass, you're going to get more spotted bass out here than you're going to have largemouth. And that's not necessarily always the best thing, especially if you're trying to go for bigger fish. You may not want to be subjecting yourself to as many spotted bass. So that's one thing you just kind of keep in mind during this fall to winter transition. If your lake has equal parts spotted bass or largemouth, or even more spotted bass, you'll find more largemouth back in the creeks. Now, if you're in a part of the lake that has more largemouth than spots, it doesn't really matter, and you can kind of you can use what I'm applying for largemouth going forward. Now, the big thing I really pay attention to in that that fall to winter transition is water clarity. Water clarity is extremely critical for me, because what you'll find is that a lot of the bass on these deeper clear lakes that are offshore are actually going to be suspended chasing bait fish. That's what happens on a lot of these lakes like Table Rock, where you have clear water down here by the dam. Let's say you go to this creek right here. this creek may have 6 to 7, maybe even 8 or 9 feet of water visibility. If we pull up Navionics on this exact creek, what you'll see if I transition over here is that there's not a lot of flat points or anything these fish can get on. It's basically just a creek channel. It's 140 feet deep, and then there's a bunch of these little creek arms that go out. And as the water gets clearer and clearer, a lot of those bass will suspend on balls of bait fish, whether that's gizzard shad, threadfin shad, or on blueback herring, and just randomly swim around out here. Sometimes they'll be setting up at the tops of standing timber. Sometimes they'll just be randomly chasing shad. And personally, I don't like fishing for these fish because really, unless you want to just like graph around all day, find the schools of bait, and then follow them with your 2D sonar, or just follow them with live scope all day, you're really just going to be staring at a screen. And you guys know I stare at a screen a lot anyways, but something about just staring at live scope all day, following fish around, is probably one of the least enjoyable styles of fishing for me, just because I don't feel like I'm using that much skill or intuition. It's just like drop the trolling motor, follow bait fish, cast at bait fish. That's not super exciting for me. So I try to avoid these situations where the bait are in the center of these creeks. Not to say it's not a good technique. It's actually a great technique. You can catch them on a jigging spoon, an ice fishing jig, a tailspin, Demiki rig, stuff like that. And I mean, you can hammer them, catch a lot of fish in a day. But that's not really my style. I just prefer to not do that because I don't find it fun. So what I like to do instead is find a section of the lake where you actually have more stains of the water. And on Table Rock, usually if you head up one of these creek arms up here, up this creek arm, or up Long Creek, you're going to find some areas where you have more water or less water visibility. So if we take a look at this area right here, for example, this area has maybe 3 foot of water visibility compared to 7 or 8 foot of visibility down by the dam. One thing about having that 3 feet of visibility or less is it's going to position those fish shallower. Usually they're only going to get 20 to maybe 30 feet deep if you have 3 foot of water visibility. And that's just something I've just picked up over time. If we take a look at this area on Navionics as opposed to on Google Earth, you'll find that it looks similar in the sense that there's a creek right here that runs in. There's a nice creek right there that winds through, and the bait fish will get in this creek. But when they want to actually move up to feed, instead of just sitting out here in this creek channel feeding, swimming around randomly, they'll actually push up onto these rounded flat points, like this point here and this point here. It's a very rounded point, like nothing really that magnificent about it. But on this point in particular, there's actually some rock piles that have just been dropped out here. And what will happen is instead of suspending out here and forcing you to throw a jigging spoon or using the live scope to catch them, they'll actually pull up onto this point on hard cover in 20 to maybe 35 feet of water. And if you can find some bait fish around some rocks down in 20 to 35 feet, you can actually catch those fish on a blade bait, on a football jig, and that gets into style fishing I really like to do. I can graph those fish with down imaging, 2D sonar, side imaging, really start locating those fish and getting them on these really rounded points. I find I don't have nearly as much success on the super steep points that drop straight into the channel, like this main river channel here. Don't nearly catch as many fish here in that fall to winter transition, or on these like main lake bluff end points. I'm catching most of my fish on these very subtle, gradual, rounded points. That's the key stuff that I'm looking for. If we even get back into, let me find another good example. Like if you're in a creek like this creek is rolling in, and this point looks really obvious right here. It drops off in the creek channel on both sides. This is not the type of point I'm really going to be focused on. Instead, I might look at this point in here that's super long and just gradual sloping and drops off on both sides. Maybe in the mouth of the creek to kind of the first third of the creek. Another rounded point would be like this point right here or this point right here with a creek channel running in. Those are the key points for me during that fall to winter transition. Again, where you have 3-ish for the water visibility, maybe 4 feet, you can get away with it, but 2 to 4 feet of visibility, that's definitely the key there. Really quick, Randy, before I get your comment, huge shout out to Tom Morehouse for the $20 super chat. I'll be on Lake Fork in December. Hopefully I find some. Lake Fork should be really good. Just keep a jerkbait in your hand. Maybe throw the Alabama rig around. You'll definitely catch some fish. Appreciate the super chat, Tom. So anyways, Randy, what do you think about all that?
Well, I think you're right on about the points there, Johnny. That's just, you can't go wrong, with those secondary points or the main points this time of year, which gets us into our next segment of my second one would be the secondary points we're talking about. And I'm going to sort of go over this with you guys. Let me show you my screen here.
Dustin, saw you on the stream here. Good to see you at the marina the other day as well. I was actually out with Rick Clun that day, Dustin. I don't know if you would have noticed, but Rick was in my boat. We were out there on Table Rock fishing when we saw you, so it was kind of funny because Rick is like, "Oh man, they don't even know me anymore, and they see in this Johnny Schultz kid." Just messing with you. No, Rick was no problem. We were just messing around with each other. Anyways, go for it, Randy.
Okay, so I got Lake Hartwell pulled up here, guys. I'm sort of going to show you a different type of progression here, what we're talking about. And back to Johnny's point there about points. Guys, points, here's one thing about bass fishing. You could go out and you could do nothing but fish points 12 months out of the year, and you could catch a bunch of fish. Bass live on points all year long. I mean, they really do. They spawn on points. They suspend on them. They're on the bottom. They use them in different depth zones. That's why you always see boats sitting on points, is because they're the best places on the lake to fish, usually deep or shallow. So anyway, I got Hartwell pulled up here. I'm going to sort of show you the next option that you have for this transitional deal. Let's say, for example, what we're talking about here, you see this little cut, and you can see I'm on the lower end of Hartwell right here. Here's the dam, so I'm on the lower end. Another thing about this real quick, guys, this time of year, everybody that knows much about my fishing, I like to fish shallow water, but this is a time of year that I prefer the clear water. I don't normally fish the stained water much this time of year as those water temperatures start to get down in the 50s. So I'm usually on the lower end of the lake or the mid part of the lake, depending upon the clarity. But what we're talking about here is this is what we talked about just a second ago about the fish moving from these flat banks to transition into these steeper banks. The next thing that they do, and they can do it at the same time or a little bit later, is these same fish that are on this transition bank right here from flat to deep, they'll start using these secondary points here in the coves and the creeks. And they not only will they start using them this time of year, but they're going to live here and use these places heavily all the way up to the pre-spawn. Every one of these points are different right here. Every point that you have in a creek arm, you're going to have varying slopes of bank angles in it. So like here, you can see this is a flat point, rolls off, comes a long way out before it drops off into deeper water. You're out here in 10 or 12 foot of water, depending upon the lake level, with quick drops down close to 50 feet of water, where on this point right here, you can see it's a little bit steeper. One piece of advice I'll give you guys is don't get caught up or don't get locked in on point angles. You may say, okay, I figured them out. They're on the flat points or they're on the steep points. Bass will live on every slope, every point angle at the same time. So don't really get locked in too much, excuse me, on the angle of the bank. Pay more attention to the rock composition on the bottom, any type of cover, breaks, brush, rock piles, cane piles on a lake like Hartwell, the structure that's off the point ends and sides. So here's my main pattern for this time of year is one of the first things I like to do in the early time of the winter is I like to fish these points shallow. Johnny's going to be, if Johnny and I were fishing this area right here, he'd be out here graphing this area right here, and I'd be up here on the bank in all these places. And we'd both catch fish. He'd catch fish out here, in 20, 30, 40 foot of water. I'd be up here catching them on the bank. One of the top techniques that you guys can possibly do in the early winter, late fall transition on these points here is burning a spinnerbait. It is a deadly, deadly technique, guys. Anytime that water temperature is between like 52 and 62 degrees, I'll just run a pattern of like all these secondary points back in a creek or cove arm. And what I'll do is I usually get out on the very end of the point. I approach it shallow, and I'll fan cast both sides of the point from a lot of different angles, depending upon the direction of the wind. And one of the things I'll show you here, maybe Johnny can pull it up, is, guys, I'm going to do a plug here, but this plug is backed up by a lot of different evidence. That Megabass SV3 spinnerbait that Megabass came out with last year, that is the best burn and spinner bait I have ever seen in my life. It's like, I'm a burn and spinner bait fanatic. I mean, I've had guys build me bodies just to burn spinner baits on, and this bait, I'm just putting away everything else I got and going to this thing. It tracks super true. It casts a mile. You can burn it as hard as you want. I'm getting over a cold here, sorry about the cough. And what I'll do is I'll take that SV3 spinnerbait and I just run and gun these points. You're looking for some type of low light condition. A lot of times they'll bite it the best right off the bat in the morning, or if you have wind or some type of a heavy overcast. If you guys have a lake that has a mixed species of bass, like a good mix of largemouth spotted bass and smallmouth bass, I just can't tell you how deadly of a technique it is. Now, second to that, to these same type of areas here, is if for some reason they get off the spinnerbait, or say it's real bright and there's not much wind and it's a little bit tougher on the spinnerbait, I'll get on these same points with either a wigglewort or a rock crawler. A lot of people think about that wigglewort rock crawler bite as being some type of pre-spawn deal, but guys, there's dudes around here in the Ozarks. They've been catching fish on those baits for the last 3 weeks, and they don't talk about it. A rock crawler or a wigglewort fished on secondary points during the fall-winter transition is a great way to catch quality fish. So if I was out, like right now, if we went out on Lake Hartwell tomorrow, I'd have like a wigglewort and the SB3 spinnerbait on. I'd be running back in these coves and creeks, and I'd run every one of these secondary points. I just run and gun them, and I'd expect to catch a big limit of spotted bass doing that.
That's a good deal right there, Randy. And it's that SV3 spinnerbait is incredible. Was on Table Rock the other day. I was catching them offshore on some standing timber. If you saw that video, posted on the main YouTube channel, Fish the Moan YouTube channel. Now, I was slow rolling that thing through timber with a 3/4 ounce head, and then I was also catching some burning it. So yeah, it's a really versatile spinnerbait for sure. Randy's got me hooked on all these Megabass baits. Burning a hole in my pocket over here, Randy. If you could stop sharing your screen here really quick. Good deal. Okay, so next area that I want to talk about, kind of do a little bit of a shift from these deep clear lakes to a little bit more of a stained lake. And what I have pulled up here is Brewer Lake, which is a little tiny lake that I used to fish all the time in central Arkansas. And I use this in a lot of examples because I can actually take the lake down like 10 feet. There was one year when it was super low. And I want to give you guys an idea of what you can look for a lot of times on this during this fall to winter transition that a lot of you guys overlook. So if you scroll into this area here, you can notice that you're basically looking at a giant flat bank. There's nothing really happening here. You can actually see that there's a road bed that runs right here, which is kind of nice. But there's just a big flat right here. It's not a steep bank, and this might be what more of your lakes might look like. They might not have a ton of creek arms and things like that. It might just be a lake, and you just have these big flat areas out here in the middle of nowhere. Well, if we take this lake back down to basically 10 feet below normal pool, you can see that there's a bunch of these flats out here. Again, if we go back up to normal, you can look right here, and then you can see in here there's this big flat area. And these giant flats are not fished very often by anglers because they prefer to just go to the bank, fish visible targets along the shoreline, especially this time of year. But some of the biggest fish in all these lakes during that late fall, like November to December transition, live on these flats, but they're not living deep. They're living in like 3 to maybe 10 feet of water offshore on these big flats. And what they're living on are, for example, you can see that there's a ditch that runs in right here. And ditches are just absolutely gold in the fall transition because those bass will move into these ditches in the fall, and then they'll move out of these ditches back out to the main lake as you get into the colder months. And on these flats, right here, you can obviously see there's a bunch of stuff out here. And before this Google Earth image was taken in 2012, I just graphed all the stuff back in like 2008, 9, 10. I would just graph it with side imaging or 2D sonar even and find it. But basically, you can see there's house foundations out here. There's big stumps here. There's an old underwater culvert. There are more logs and stuff on this hard spot. You can see that there's like a brighter bottom next to the dirtier bottom, or the darker bottom. Even just like a random hard spot like this that looks like nothing, this can hold a bunch of fish right here. It's like basically dirt next to that harder bottom, and like that spot right there is a sneaky little deal that I probably shouldn't be talking about, but I don't fish there much anymore. So basically you have this right there. And then, as you move along this flat, you can see there's some places just off this flat where you have these big stumps that drop into deeper water. These are all areas that I'm really going to be targeting in this late fall, early winter transition. Any sort of isolated cover. Here's another culvert off this flat. I'll pull up another flat over here that's similar. You can see this big flat that just sticks out into the middle of the lake. You can barely tell it's there unless you had a contour map or could look down with the lake drawn down. And I'm just going to fish in these drains, these ditches, on any isolated stumps out here, any sort of brush. And my go-to baits are going to be a medium diving crankbait, maybe a swing head, like a biffle bug, something like that, and a squarebill crankbait. And then maybe also pitching a jig around if I find anything that's like a big laydown sticking up, I might pitch a jig at it. But I'm really just getting out here, and if the lake is drawn or back up, my boat's coming in here, and this ditch runs like this, and I'm basically just putting my boat in 8 to 15 feet of water and casting on the edge of this flat and up on top of the flat on those isolated pieces of cover. It's made much easier now because I have 360 imaging, which is a great tool, and I'll make a video about that here soon about how I use 360 to find all that stuff or help me fish all that stuff. But that is really the deal that I do a lot offshore. I just are in this fall transitions. I fish offshore, but not deep, in 4 to 6 foot of water, 8 foot of water on those flats. One question from Ryan is, do you ever catch fish out deep on soft bottoms? Definitely. The only reason those fish would be there, though, is if there's a brush pile there or some type of cover. So if you have a brush pile on a soft bottom area, it'll definitely still hold fish. But if you just have a soft bottom with no cover, no rocks, no wood, nothing like that, it's very unlikely I'm going to catch fish there. The bait fish have no incentive to move up there to feed. There's nothing that grows plankton on it. So just a soft mud bottom with nothing, no, definitely not. You need something up there. Shell bed, rock pile, brush, something to hold those fish. So anyways, Randy, before we jump into your next one, I do need to take a quick break here to do some housekeeping, some plugs. First thing really quick is I wanted to let you guys know, I have a couple big plugs coming up next week, but I want to let you guys know about some of our Fish the Moment lake breakdowns. If you guys are struggling to find areas during this fall to winter transition or any time of the year, check out our lake breakdowns. I don't have as many as Randy does, so we'll go over here to Randy's breakdowns. They're focused more on shallow water areas and offshore. You get 40 GPS waypoints that you can transfer straight to your fish finder, and we use the same methodology that we're explaining in the stream to pick spots on lakes all across the country. We give you detailed area descriptions of what the areas look like, ideal fishing conditions with lure recommendations, keys to fishing the lake, and detailed guide on how to transfer those waypoints straight to your fish finder. We have lakes all across the country. We have our fall breakdowns up right now. You can check out that we have a bunch of them. We also have all of our winter breakdowns, and Randy will be adding more to these as we go on. So if you guys have any winter fishing trips planned, definitely check out some of these breakdowns. And if you also want to get prepared for summer or spring next year, we also have our summer and spring breakdowns that are available as well. We also have personal lake breakdowns that are available every Monday. They get restocked. If we don't have your lake and you really want it broken down by Randy, he will make you a personal lake breakdown. And other exciting news, Randy, is that we're actually going to be adding a new member to the Fish the Moment team to do lake breakdowns, and that's Matt Steffen, who is from up north, and he'll be doing some northern lake breakdowns for us for those northern smallmouth, northern largemouth. And so if you guys are up north and you are struggling to find spots, Matt is going to be helping you guys out. We'll also be bringing Matt onto the live stream and doing a bunch of other things. So he'll be joining the Fish the Moment team. So excited to bring Matt on board, and you'll see more content from him over the next few months here.
Yeah, Matt is a hammer, guys. I'm telling you, if you guys want to know anything about those northern lakes, man, get one of his breakdowns, because he's like the expert for northern fisheries. He really is. Super great guy, goes. Really good guy too.
For sure. Great to be working with Matt. Check out his YouTube channel too, Matt Steffen Fishing. It's a great YouTube channel with a lot of great content. We're actually going to try to see if we can do some Fish the Moment style videos up there with Matt, where he can do like catch 15 challenges and stuff. We don't know exactly what we're going to be doing, but we have a bunch of big ideas, so we'll see how many of them come to fruition, and you guys can follow along in the journey there. A couple other things. Huge shout out to Bridgeford Foods for sponsoring our podcast and live stream this week. Right now it's just a live stream. I'll get the podcast up here as soon as I can. I'll show you guys. Next week, you'll understand. Been pretty busy. I'm working on a really big project, so you'll see that next week. And also a big shout out to the Bass Tank and from Tulsa, Oklahoma for sponsoring the podcast and the live stream. And if you guys do want to have a chance to win a free case of Bridgeford beef jerky, we're going to be giving away another case next week, as we always do. And what I want you guys to let us know this week in the comments of this video is, what is your favorite bait to fish during this fall to winter transition? We talk about areas a lot in this video, but I want to know about what your favorite baits are. So don't leave it in the chat here. Actually go into the YouTube video comments, of the YouTube video, and leave us your favorite baits. And just let us know what it is, maybe the color and the brand and the size. And we'll be picking one winner next week to win 12 cases of Bridgeford beef jerky. So big thanks there again to Bridgeford for sponsoring the live stream. Couple comments over here. One super chat from K&A Reefing. How do you find better quality fish? I've been out when tournaments are going on and I'm finding smaller ones while they're landing big bags. Lake Norman in North Carolina. Man, Norman is a tricky lake. We'll talk about that. He runs that question here really quick. And then before we do that, Ryan Williams, appreciate the $1.99 super chat with the cool 1UP logo. Give us an extra life here, Randy, to finish out this stream. So thanks, Ryan, for that super chat. So let's answer that question from K&A Reefing about how to catch bigger fish on Lake Norman. And I'll give my pass on that really quick, Randy. I know you fish Lake Norman. You fished it several times, but I'll give my quick little pass on Norman. Maybe while I'm doing that, you can pull it up on Google Earth, or on Navionics as well, while I'm just doing that. But I got Lake Norman pulled up here. Big thing on Lake Norman I would recommend for catching bigger fish is you need to be able to identify key boat docks on Lake Norman that are going to be holding bigger fish. Boat docks are the key to big largemouth on Lake Norman. That's where all the good fish are caught. And the boat docks, there's a million of them out there. So what makes a better boat dock than another one? Well, that will change year to year and from week to week. But in general, there's three components of a good boat dock that I've found. One, you want to have access to deeper water close by, especially in this late winter to early or this late fall to early winter transition. If you can find a dock that's kind of on a transition here from like a shallow flat out here to a steeper bank, usually where you find those transitions where there's deeper water close by, but it's shallow also off the one side of it, that's going to be a really productive dock. Here's a couple more examples where you kind of have a flat right here, and then you have a dock that cuts in, it's a little bit steeper down this bank, and it's flatter on that bank. Just irregularities on the bank. A lot of the boat docks, you'll find, the boat docks themselves are the same, but what's under the water is what's important. Another element under the water that can be really important is the presence of brush piles. A lot of guys will plant man-made brush piles under boat docks, and when I would fish a lot of boat docks like on Lake Hamilton in the winter, I would graph them with side imaging and graph these boat docks to find as many brush piles as possible, then run them with a jig. The final factor is you just need to hit a ton of boat docks. If you ever listen to any of the good anglers out on Lake Norman, Brian Thrift, Matt, what's his name? I can't think of Matt. He does the podcast with Brian Thrift. Matt Airy. All those guys. They run a lot of boat docks in a day. They might fish 50 to 100 boat docks in one day. And that might seem crazy to you, but you have to fish a ton of docks to be able to get 5 quality bites. These guys are bringing in big bags because they're running a ton of water. if you're running 15 boat docks in an 8-hour fishing day, you're not fishing in enough docks. In 8 hours, you should be able to fish at least 50 to 75 boat docks, maybe 100. And if you can run that many docks, you increase your probability of catching fish, especially if they have brush around them and stuff like that. So part of it is just knowing right what docks to fish, then fishing as many of those good docks as possible. And mainly that just takes time on the water, of learning the lake, learning the good docks, and just kind of figuring it out. Would you agree with that, Randy?
Yeah, you covered most all of it there on Norman, Johnny. The only thing I would add to that is your bait selection is going to have a big part of that too. For example, on Lake Norman, most people there, I mean, a shaky head or a wacky rig fished around the docks gets most of that's what people do most of the time. One of the things you can do is basically upsize your lure selection, go to a full size jig. Lake Norman is a pretty clean water lake. So I would suggest going to like a 1/2 ounce green pumpkin jig with like some type of a big trailer on it, like a Zoom Super Chunk like that. It's gonna take away the number of bites you get, but the quality of fish, what you're looking for, is going to go way up. Also, something like a full size Zoom Brush Hog, 8-inch lizard, just upsize your bait in the same areas. And really at Norman, you don't have to do anything but fish docks. You can catch fish out on some points and shoals and seawalls and laydowns up the river, but you really don't have to fish anything but docks on Norman.
For sure. One more question here from Matthew Ace Vid. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I really apologize, Matthew. I don't want to butcher it. He says, would you be looking for areas with rock and shallow water on a tidal river, like areas with big rock and smaller rock mixed together? And would that be better in the winter than muddy or sandy bottoms? Yeah, definitely in the wintertime, rock, especially on tidal rivers. We'll actually talk about rivers next. That'll be our next spot, next thing to talk about. River systems usually are going to be colder because you have a lot of rain and water movement, so those rocks will heat up faster and they'll hold more bait fish and more fish. So actually, Randy, that's a great segue. Maybe pull up a river system and give these guys a look at maybe a spot on a river that you might be fishing this time of year.
Yeah, let me pull up a river here. I'm going to go down to probably Lay Lake in Alabama here. Let me get pulled up.
And Cody asked, what's the name of the podcast in that area? I think it's called Let's Talk Fish. They don't post very often, but it's some good stuff over there. They got some good tournament recaps. You can watch the old episodes, but it's Let's Talk Fish with Brian Thrift and Matt Airy.
Yeah. Okay, I'm pulling it up here, Johnny. Let me get it here.
Yeah, and then if you could just share your screen.
Okay, you got the screen there?
Yep, Johnny? I got it.
Okay, I got Lay Lake here, guys, and basically the upper end of Lay Lake is a river. I mean, it's like a river. So the thing in the transition time and into winter, as far as when I'm fishing any type of a river lake, and this would be something like parts of Logan Martin, Lake Jordan, Lay Lake, Neely Henry, a lot of the Alabama lakes, or any type of lake that has a river section on it. The upper end of Kentucky Lake, just any place that has some current with the upper end is a really good place to catch fish in the winter time of the year. Because one of the things you're going to find out about river fishing in the winter time of the year, normally those fish are a little bit more active. They're a little bit more aggressive. There's something about the current and the fact that they don't go as deep in a river. It just makes these fish bite more all winter long. So that's what I found out, especially if you got a lake that's got a lot of spotted bass in it. The river fishing actually can be better than lake fishing. So one of the things that I'm looking for here, it's the proximity of the river to the dam on the upper end of the lake. Now, if you look at this right here at Lay Lake here, you can see here's the dam right here on the upper end of Lay. And then the lake, it's pretty riverine all the way down through here, and it gradually opens up down here. Most of the time, guys, what you're going to find is there's a sweet spot in these river arms of the lakes like this. And the sweet spot is dependent upon water level, time of day, and where the cover is located. So, for example, on a lake like Lay Lake, one of the key areas for me anytime I'm fishing a river arm is I don't really like to fish the extreme upper end of it here. And the reason I don't is this is the area that gets most of the attention. A lot of guys will run to the dam and they'll fish the tailwaters, they'll fish all the riprap banks and eddies in this particular area here. It's a pretty difficult way to fish a river system. It's not as easy as what it seems. There'll be guys that do good in tournaments on the upper end like here, but most of the time you have to know what you're doing to catch fish up there. There's a lot of subtle things that go on that makes it difficult to fish. So what I like to do is I like to come down in that 3 to 5 mile zone below the dam, which is sort of like be this area here. Now, the first thing that you want to remember is that anytime you have a bend in the river here, this is another area that gets a tremendous amount of attention. People will flock to river bends like this, and these areas right here get a tremendous amount of attention. Any bend in the river gets a lot of attention. So I'm not saying that they're not good, but I try to stay away from the bends simply because they draw so much attention. The things that I'm looking for are sweet spots on straight stretches that don't get as much pressure. Now, when we're talking about wintertime fishing on a river, it's all about whatever available cover is along the bank. Now, here, you can't really see on this particular, I'd have to go to Google Earth on it really, but anytime that you've got a river section like this, it's a uniform river section, and it's all about the cover that is along these banks here. Now, these banks you can have rocky banks with rock transitions, but mainly it's going to be isolated laydowns that are on these particular banks. Some of the banks will have just a regular rocky bank. Some of them will have undercuts to them. They'll be like mud, sandy banks with undercuts. But the thing that you want to look for in the winter is you want to look for the current break. And the current breaks do not have to be created by any type of like outcropping or anything like that. A current break can be caused by laydown timber in the water. It can be caused by, again, the undercut bank. It can be caused by a stump in the water. Anything that will break that current is going to attract bass, and they're going to set up in that particular area in the wintertime. So from that standpoint there, it's all about picking apart the visual places that the bass are going to hide at. I mean, yeah, there are some high percentage areas, like, for example, if you go up here, these creek intersections like this, there's always going to be a population of bass living around the creek intersection. But again, it's going to be the high pressured area. Most guys, they'll run up here, they pull in here, it's real obvious, they'll hit the 2 points and they'll go. The places that I like to look for, if I see a real obvious creek intersection like this in a river arm, this is sort of a magnet to the bass, because these bass will some of the bass will go into these creek arms and live, but since there's current breaks that naturally occur here, it attracts a lot of bass here. But what I like to look for is I go up the banks maybe 50 to 100 yards on either side of this real obvious area, and I'll start looking for some subtle stuff just down from these areas, because I know there's a large group of fish that use this as a highway, as a stopping off point. But for me, my high percentage areas would be these areas like 50 yards to 200 yards away from these obvious spots right here. But when you're looking at a map like this, when you're fishing river sections like this, there's going to be obvious places like the down current side of islands, obvious current break, but you can't really tell by looking at a map, since you don't know what's here, other than if you look at Google Earth, you could see where the laydowns are. But even then on Google Earth, since the river receives such a tremendous flow of water, the laydowns are constantly changing. Some are getting flooded out and washed down. New ones are created all the time. So Google Earth even does not give you an accurate depiction, because the river arm's changing. You just have to go up here and visually look at it here. Visually pick apart any laydowns that you have, and just fish visible targets that have some type of current break behind them. In that situation, you can't beat a jig. I mean, a heavy jig, like a 5/8 ounce jig, is going to be your number one bait. And if it, this time of year, yeah, you could catch them on a creature bait in warmer weather. But if I'm fishing a river arm during the winter fall transition, I don't have anything else but a heavy jig on. Usually a heavy jig with some type of a smaller trailer. For example, I'll use a 5/8 ounce jig, but I'll use like the Zoom Super Chunk Junior on there. I want that fast fall. I want it to be able to get down into that current where the fish are at. I'm not concerned about the rate of fall because those fish are tucked down there on the bottom in those current breaks. They're not going to hit that bait on the fall in that heavy current. So you don't have to mess around with a light jig. But yeah, stay with the jig, fish current breaks, obvious cover.
Good stuff right there, Randy. And that's really great, especially great advice, especially if you have heavy current in the wintertime on upper ends of your lake. If you could stop sharing your screen here, Randy, I'll start showing guys what a real river looks like. Rather than some lake river stuff, we're going to go to the Arkansas River, a true river. And I have my pride on because I'm an Arkansas River rat. I grew up fishing the Little Rock Pool and the Maumelle Pool of the Arkansas River, and it's all river. There's no lake to these. It's just a straight up channel of mud going through. And so all the advice Randy gave is awesome on those type of lakes. So not trying to just poking some fun at him, but let's pull up a real river here. And a lot of guys are asking about dirty water. And they always ask us about dirty water because we're always fishing Table Rock Lake and showing Grand Lake and Table Rock. I grew up about 2 minutes from the Arkansas River, and I've spent more time in the Arkansas River, pool 5, 6, and 7 than any other body of water by far. So I know the Arkansas River inside and out. And in this late winter, kind of late fall, early winter time of the year, there are two things that really play for me on these river systems. In the fall, a lot of your bass are going to be on the main river, and especially as that water temperature is above 55 degrees, you'll still find a lot of fish that are setting up on these jetties out here. There's a lot of jetties that run out that have a mixture of these poles or these like pylons, pillars, whatever you want to call them, and then the actual rock jetties. There's some jetties that are just straight up pylons or poles, and some of them that are actually the rock jetties. And a lot of these bass will set up on these areas on the main river. At the same time, there's also going to be a certain percentage of bass that's set up behind a lot of these islands. So you'll go into an island or a stretch back in here, and there'll be fish that's set up just in the mouths of these pockets and coves and islands that cut off the main river into some of these backwaters. Sometimes you'll find that there's stretches of laydowns or water willow that can be really productive in the fall time. But as you get into the winter time of the year, a lot of these areas start to get a little bit trickier because the water cools down pretty quick. That cold, shallow, or that muddy, shallow water that's moving will cool down, and it will get into the the 40s and sometimes even into the 30s. I've caught fish, Randy, on the Little Rock Pool in 36-degree water temperature before. So very cold water on these, and that was like with two inches of water visibility, 36-degree water.
Man.
I mean, that's brutal.
Yeah.
But what I do in those situations is rock becomes a really big key for these fish. And it doesn't really matter if you're on the main river or if you're in backwaters. I'll explain both. But even when that water temperature is in the 30s, you can catch fish on the actual main river part of this lake, but you have to find areas where you have good rock cover and you have current breaks. You need to have a break in that current. Here's an example of a spot where I've caught them in January. It's super cold weather on the Little Rock Pool over here on the Arkansas River, and you can see that it's right off the main river. It's just a main drag down this river, but you have a small little area where that current's going to flow. It's actually going to flow this direction, and then it's going to hit down this bank and then create an eddy right here, and there's some rock and stuff like that. This rock right here is not deep. You're only looking at 2, 3, 4 foot of water, but if you throw a bait like a flat side crankbait and just reel it as slow as you possibly can around these rocks, you can catch fish on these areas even in the coldest water temperatures. Now, fortunately, as the water temperatures warm up, and they're still even a little bit warm in that fall to winter transition, you can catch them a lot easier on just a regular crankbait, a spinner bait, and you can actually catch a lot of fish on these areas where the river kind of cuts in from the main river and there's rock there. That's just a really big key for me. You can find a lot of these areas. The river is going to run this way, and then it's going to snake around a point with some rock like right in here. There's actually a riprap bank in here as well that's pretty decent. You can keep rolling up here and find even areas like this where you have this main river that runs like this, and then you have these docking bays, and you can find fish that'll set up around some of these the pillars or the poles where the barges tie up. That's sometimes those barge tie-ups can be really good. And you can find a lot of these areas that just stick off the river that have the bank is not what I'm looking for. Let me go up. I'll show you one that's really, really good. That's been really good for me on this stretch of the river. Let me go up here. This is pool 7 now. Is like right in here where you can see that there's a creek that feeds in, and there's big rock around the mouth of this creek, and there's actually rock around some of these bridges. This type of area is absolutely dynamite in that late fall all the way through the winter off the main river, where you basically just have rocks sticking right off the bank. Now, another way you can catch these fish on the same exact pool is instead of trying to fish those main river spots, which are more current dependent. The more current you have, the better those places are going to be. The less current you have, I actually start moving back into creeks, and I try to find these creeks that have rock in the back of them. This creek back in here, for example, does not have a lot of riprap bank on it. It's more just grass and mud banks. Instead, I'm going to be going into this creek back in here, and if you run all the way back into here and get back into this part, there's actually a navigational channel that's just all rock riprap down this area. It's all just rock bank all the way through here, and it goes for miles. And I've caught fish all the way up and down this thing, all the way down like back into here where it gets really narrow. You can't go too much further past here, but you can get all the way back into here, and you can find fish in these narrow canals and channels where you have rock riprap down these banks. And this water is not going to be as affected by the current. It will still have some current flow through it, but even if you don't have current, you can actually catch fish in these areas. And what I throw here a lot of times is a jerk bait. I'll fish around these bridge pilings and fish down these riprap banks, and the middle of this channel might be 10 foot of water. The banks are in 2-3 feet of water, and I'll just fish like a Smithwick rattling rogue that's just like a chrome jerkbait. It dives 2 to 3 feet deep, and I'll just fish a jerkbait as slow as I possibly can, suspending jerkbait down these banks and stuff like that, extremely slow, especially the colder the water gets. As it gets a little bit warmer, you can still catch fish down these same exact channels, just throwing a crankbait and just covering water down them. Not as effective in the early fall to winter transition, but especially into the winter, this is where I catch a lot of my good fish. So, there's other areas you can find where if you can get like an area that has some man-made rock back in here behind some of these islands, those can also be sometimes effective if there's a lack of current. But usually I try to get back into these creeks further as the current dies down, and I'll stay more on the main river as the current is stronger. Any thoughts there, Randy?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever fished a river that's dirty and 37 degree water. That's about as tough as it gets there. But the river systems like that, what Johnny's talking about there, it's real area specific. There's little like short stretches that are sweet spots in there, and there's a tremendous amount of dead water. So the Arkansas River is a tough place to fish. I mean, it's hard on your equipment. There's a lot of dead water, but there's some quality fish in it if you do get around them. But yeah, that is a true river system there.
Yeah, it's pretty rough fishing on those types of water too, because it's spot oriented. You're not pattern fishing. You're finding individual spots with the current breaks with the rock, and that's a completely opposite approach from Table Rock Lake, where it's a pattern lake. You can replicate areas, and I find that more on the dirty water lakes, the dirtier the water and more you have like current and stuff, it's a spot fishery, especially on like tidal rivers and stuff like that. It's a specific spot that's good. It's not sometimes even an area or a pattern. It's just one little 20-yard stretch, and all I can recommend on those areas, guys, is you just have to put time out on the water, fishing as much as you can, studying Google Earth, trying to find sneaky little areas. I have some sneaky stuff on the Arkansas River that used to be good. A lot of it's washed away now because we've had so many floods and stuff. Most of my Arkansas River stuff is not good anymore. But it's funny because I was talking with one of my best friends who fished Lake Dardanelle and was like a stick out there. He actually, one summer, Randy, he won like 7 out of 12 tournaments out there, team tournaments, night tournaments, whatever. He was just like dominant out there. And he actually had a couple kids and just didn't get to fish as much. And now he says he can go out there and he can hardly catch fish on Lake Dardanelle because everything changed. The river
Yeah.
rose, it flooded, and you were there actually this year, how high it flooded, and that washes away it moves all the sandbars, it washes away all the shell beds, all the good little sneaky spots. It silts in a lot of the good rock, where all the good rock is now covered in sand. It's
Yeah.
crazy how these rivers can change. So really, to be good on a river, you have to just be fishing it nonstop.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting you mentioned that. There was a place on Dardanelle that I had for, there's about a 3 or 4 year period. I fished a lot of the Central Pro-Ams down there, and there was about a 100-yard section of reeds, like reeds along the main river that actually had some deep water up against these reeds. And it was some of the greatest flipping you'd ever see, because you'd have 2 to 3 feet of water in these reeds, and the big ones would just be in there. The last 2 or 3 times I fished it, it's like those reeds are still there, but they're in 6 inches of water. It's like some type of a sand, flat had moved up in there, and I haven't caught a fish out of those same reeds in years now. So it's always changing,
Always changing. It's the nice thing about Table Rock is it's like hard bottom with trees. That tree's not really going anywhere unless it falls over. That's a good deal. Awesome. One question was that right by Shoal Bay? No, the Shoal Bay is on Dardanelle. This was Little Rock Pool, down by Little Rock, the pool 6. Good deal. Well, Randy, there was more areas we wanted to show, but we're kind of out of time already. We didn't really we got 5 areas between us. We didn't get as many areas as we want, but we always talk more than we expect. And hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Again, if you guys want to get a chance to win some Bridgeford beef jerky, leave a comment down in the actual comments of the video, not in the stream here, but what your favorite bait is to fish during this November and December time of year, this late fall to early winter transition. Also, there's a 213 of you guys who are still here. Really appreciate that. Leave a like on the video if you're still here. It helps us with the YouTube algorithm. Really, the best way you can support Randy's YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, in videos is just to like our videos. The YouTube algorithm really likes it when you like the video, and that's something that just is super helpful. So it just takes 5 seconds. Just go down below on your phone or on the browser, like the video. Even if you could do that before you watch it, if you like our content, just want to support us, do that. That would be awesome. And one other thing, guys, if you are, again, interested in other spots that we might fish on your home lake, head to our website, fishthemoment.com. Check out our lake breakdowns page, and then check out all of Randy's breakdowns that we have here. You get 40 GPS waypoints so you can transfer straight to your fish finder. We have detailed area descriptions along with them, bait recommendations. A lot of you guys know the drill already. Got fall breakdowns, and we also have a lot of winter breakdowns from last year. They're still really, really good, so check those out. We have lakes all across the country, and we'll be adding more actually from Matt Steffen here and Matt Steffen Fishing on the channel very, very soon. So we'll be putting those on the website, and we'll keep you up to date on that. Next week, guys, do not miss next week's live stream, or maybe it might be the week after that. We're trying to get it all organized here, but over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be launching something that you guys are going to want to be a part of. So it may be this week, it may be next week. It's going to be one of the next couple of weeks. So make sure you tune in to the next couple of live streams, because if you're a Fish Moment fan, there's something you're not going to want to miss. Randy, anything else that you have to share before we sign off?
Yeah, just thanks for tuning in, guys. And like I said with Jonny, just like I said, we've really been hitting these lake map breakdowns hard. I got 8 or 10 new winter map breakdowns done last week, and it's just a great way not only to support the channel, what Jonny and I are doing here, but it's just some really good information that we put a lot of time into. But again, thanks for joining us. Not much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. Apparently, we only have 11 likes in this video. Only 11 people of the 180 people here liked our stream. That's disappointing. But anyways, we'll try better next time, guys. No, I'm just messing with you. Appreciate all the support, guys. Appreciate all the super chats tonight. Had a lot of great super chats. We got one from, I missed one here from, let's see here, Duong View. Appreciate the $4.99 super chat. Ryan Williams, K&A Reefing. We got Tom Morehouse and Sharky Ohio, all of the super chats. Appreciate all of that, guys. Appreciate the support. And we'll see you guys next week, same time, same place, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I'll probably try to get Matt on the stream next week, Randy, to talk about some northern bass fishing, just kind of introduce him, and we'll just kind of do a little interview with Matt Steffen here.
Awesome, man. That'll be good.
Good deal. We'll talk to you guys next week then. Enjoy your week, and best of luck on the water.